and tell us where you are watching from, and we will get things kicked off in just a couple of moments. There's Eric from Fort Worth, and Novella from Carrollton, and Tia from Houston. And somebody from Topeka. Glad to have some folks all around. Hi, Paige. James Willis. How you doing, James? Good to see some folks I know. And I know if you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you're probably very intrigued to hear this presentation because Southlake is a great city and well known to all of us. And I especially appreciate Southlake because they're my next door neighbor. I live in Grapevine and have had the privilege of watching Southlake grow and develop for the last 20 years in a very close fashion. So, but great to have people from all over. I see Keith from Fayetteville. Good to see you, my friend, and some folks from Pennsylvania and Arizona. And we are really glad to have everybody. Let me go ahead and get started with our guest, and you continue, if you will, to sign in and let us know where you're at. I want to introduce James Brandon to you. James is currently the assistant city manager in the city of Southlake, Texas, here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He was the police chief and assistant police chief before that. And he and I were talking before we started with our webinar that I met him when Ron Hollifield, our CEO, and I did a retreat for their executive team. I think that was in 2014. It was an offsite, and that was the first time that Ron and I presented the principles of servant leadership as articulated by Robert Greenleaf. And so I hated to say that we were kind of using them as a guinea pig, but I guess maybe we were. And we've gone on from there to really make that the cornerstone of our leadership development teaching. And I guess that means, James, we're going to take full credit for all of Southlake's success. And I don't know if that's fair, but that's my story that I'm sticking to it. So, James, we're really glad to have you here today. You're going to be talking about employee engagement and a culture of transformation. And I know that this is a really important topic to everyone. And, you know, culture, boy, it's never completely finished, is it? And we want to welcome you to our webinar and turn things over to you and have you share with us. So thanks for being with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate you all having me. I think I can probably go over some things today that, talk about Southlake's approach to what we did. And then also, if it's helpful, Mike mentioned I was the police chief here for just shy of 10 years. So I also have a department head view of what we did and how it was relayed from the corporate point of view, from the city manager's office and things like that. And then at the end, just go over sort of some tips and how the city approached it and how I approached engagement as a department head that resulted in this change. And then happy to answer any questions at the end, certainly.
Sounds good. Well, we'll turn it over to you.
All right, let me get my screen shared. All right. Mike, I'm assuming that you can see that okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, so let's get going. So cultural transformation in the city of Southlake. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Gallup's Q12. And I'm not trying to sell anybody Gallup. You can certainly use whatever system that you like. But it is what we used, and it's what we continue to use. We'll actually open up this year's employee engagement survey to all our employees on October 1st. So it's been a very successful system. So for those that aren't familiar with it, I'm going to touch on it a little bit just so you kind of have a sense of where we're coming from and the approach that we used. So Gallup has a dedicated Q12 system. Of course, is based in all of their years of data and surveys of all kinds of organizations. We really like this because it's backed very much by data, and it's really science-based. sort of takes some of the mystique out of employee engagement because it seems like kind of a foggy thing that maybe you're unsure about or you can't quite grasp. So it's been great for us. If you don't use it, it's certainly something to look at for you. So kind of the basis for employee engagement is, an engaged employee is somebody that's involved in and is enthusiastic about their work. So these are your rock star employees. They know their jobs. They're happy to come to work every day. They derive a sense of satisfaction out of it. You've got them in a position where they're really able to use their talents. They're aligned with the organization's goals. They look for ways to achieve outcomes. These are the employees that solve problems before you even know that you have a problem. And I think that we all could make a list right now of who these employees are, right? Like we all know the people that come to work and just knock it out of the park every day. So what we wanted to do in Southlake is embark on a dedicated system to increase those numbers of employees to help get the city really to where we needed it to be and where we thought it could go. So the impact of employee engagement, if you're not familiar with it, again, this is through all of Gallup's data. You can see some of those numbers there. I'm not going to read them all, but if particularly with city councils, if they're not familiar with it and they ask why you're doing this, this is the business case for it. There's obviously a people case for it. But at the end of the day, when you can talk about an 18% increase in productivity, 66% increase in well-being, the negative outcomes decrease, 81% less absenteeism, 18% less turnover. So you can see all of the things that result from doing this that really make it worthwhile. So we'll get into Southlake's results a little bit again, just to kind of give you a snapshot. So these are our 2023 results. You can see that boat canoe figure there. You've got the employees that are all paddling together. Those are your engaged employees, which are 53% of our employees. And then you've got the not engaged employees, which are the yellow figures there. That's the middle 37%. Those employees aren't bad employees. They're not doing, anything nefarious to you. They're just kind of coming to work and they do, the minimum that they have to do. They're not knocking it out of the park, but they're certainly okay. And then that 10% is actively disengaged employees. And those are the people that come to work every day and are working against you. Those are the people that, again, all of you can make a mental list of who these people are, either in your organization or people that you've worked with in the past. They come to work every day and they work to tear down. The first part of my career was in the Corpus Christi Police Department. And, I worked with people there that came to work every day and were just miserable and actively worked against the department. And I would think that you didn't get sentenced here. Like, I don't think you're doing community service or something like that. You can probably leave if you're that unhappy. So it's that group of people. So there's a little more on our engagement index, that those engaged, not engaged, and actively disengaged numbers. And then you can see what best practice organizations have, which is where we are striving to get to. So we've certainly still got some work to do. Mike mentioned that culture is, it's not something that ever stops by any means, and certainly not. It's a daily function that can even come down to every single interaction that you have with an employee. I'm probably as guilty of this as anybody, of just getting mired into my day and the next thing I have to do, or the next task, or the next meeting, and not realizing that, an interaction that I have in the hallway with an employee is something that they carry with them. So all of those things matter all through every level of the organization to help us get better. So our historical trends. So we started doing this in 2013. And I wanted to put this slide in there so that you can see the effect of having a dedicated program and using the system that we chose, and how your efforts can improve those engaged employees. So you can see from 2013, those engaged employees, particularly that green bar, increasing. In 2023, it declined some. That's as a result of really a specific problem, and I and the city manager expected to see that decline. So if we saw that decline and we didn't know why, I would find that alarming because it means that we're disconnected somehow and we don't understand something that's happening within the organization. Again, that one is kind of what we expected, and then we take steps to obviously remedy those issues going forward. So this does not have our particular departments broken out in it. It's just too much detail to probably go into on here, but the police department in particular, if I remember correctly, in 13, I think we were in the 23rd or 21st percentile in terms of organizations with engaged employees. And then by 2021 and 2023, we'd gotten up to around the 90th percentile. So I always felt like if we can do that with police officers who by and large tend to be really cynical, disgruntled people who are not trusting because most of the people they talk to in their career are lying to them. If you can work with that group, then I think you can apply these principles and really work with anybody after that. So here you can see where Southlake's percent of engaged and disengaged has ranked from 13 through 22, and then you can see it compared to national. So nationally, about 32% of employees are engaged, and we've gotten up to 53%, 58% in 21, 18% actively disengaged, and then we've got it down to 10. You can see in 19 and 21, it was less than that. I don't know where COVID plays into that. People will probably be writing books forever on the societal effect of COVID and our workforce and how all that happened, but it certainly plays a factor, but not ever an excuse. We still have to accomplish what we need to. So we're going to talk about our approach, and I'm always an advocate of just highly common sense kind of approaches on things. So I don't think that this is a complicated thing, and there'll probably be a few things that we talk about that you might think, well, duh. It seems like common sense, but when it comes down to where the rubber meets the road, sometimes it gets a little harder than that. So our approach first was employee engagement, and improving that is part of the city's strategy. And it's part of our scorecard and our system of metrics. So you all know what gets measured gets improved, and et cetera. There's many phrases that revolve around that. But when we engaged in this, it's not we're going to take this measurement of where employee engagement sits in 2013 and then it sits on the shelf somewhere, or we might reference it every once in a while. One of the things that Southlake does really well is when we do something like this, we're all in. It's not a one-off. So, it's integrated into the city's strategy. It's integrated into the city's scorecard metrics. From there, it flows down into the department's strategy maps and business plans. So it's having it just sort of becomes part of our culture. Directors understand that it's important, and it's part of what they get reviewed on, and it's part of their quarterly report outs. So once you do that, then we get to what I always thought of as the Fight Club rule, which if you're old enough to remember Fight Club, which is the first rule of Fight Club, is that we don't talk about it. So here you have what I always feel like are two oppositional things, right? We've got a dedicated employee engagement program, and it's part of everything that I just said. And then my approach was always, and then we don't really talk about it because what happened immediately, and it's kind of the baby step when you start this thing, is directors would say, well, we're going to have an employee engagement activity. I don't know, it's a picnic in a park or something like that. And that's really the opposite of what should happen. I don't mean that you can't do something like that, but if you separate it and you call it, it's a dedicated employee engagement activity, then you've really lost, I think, what the meat of this is, which is it's just part of how we treat people. It's part of how we approach things every day. Do our employees have the equipment to do their job? Do they understand the expectations? Do they understand their job descriptions? Do they understand how they're going to be evaluated? Are they communicated with a lot and effectively? Do they understand what they're hearing? Do they have the right policies and training to allow them to be successful? Do they get feedback? Do they have individual development plans to help them get to where they need to be? All of those things matter, and all of those things are not called out separately as some kind of employee engagement. It's just how we treat people. So when we started this, I was in the police department, and I just began to talk about the focus that we were going to have on people, which really it dovetailed with how I felt about things anyway. And then as we implemented these things, our scores over the years kept going up. And then Shauna Yelverton, our former city manager, who's a wonderful person, and I would have these conversations where she would want me to outline what we were doing to improve employee engagement scores. And I would tell her, well, first of all, we don't ever even talk about employee engagement. That's just off the table. Just because I wanted it to be integrated. So I didn't want to make it a thing. I just wanted to focus on our people and how we work through that. So part of the employee engagement process for us is you get the feedback from the survey, and then we follow that up with what we call state of the team meetings, which are sort of small group meetings to get better feedback from the employees. If they wish to come to that, they certainly don't have to. We've done that where it was facilitated by an external consultant and one of our internal people. We've had it where it was just an external communications firm, because we thought that might get people to be a little more forthcoming. But what the state of the team meetings allow us to do is to really get further detail on something. So Q12 might tell us, hey, we think we've got a problem area in, I don't know, in planning and development that seems to be centered around this. But then, we can go ask and get specific answers to questions. And a story is the very first survey we did in 2013 within the police department. We got back scores in the I have the equipment I need to do my job section, which is a piece of the Q12. Those were very low. And I immediately thought, I didn't understand why, because I feel like we had gotten the employees like all the equipment they need. We got equipment coming out of our ears. But then when we checked further, we found out that we had officers whose winter coats were ordered at some point and had never come in. And it's, like November or something like that. Well, that's good to know. So sometimes it's things that are that simple that you don't know and that nobody's ever run up the chain of command or really talked about. So sometimes those state of the team meetings, they can give us back some fairly nuanced things that we have to work through, or it can be as simple as they don't have what they need to do their work every day, and no one knows. The other big thing I would say is to believe the feedback that you get from employees. So I have seen over the years that, say particular departments, employee engagement scores tend to be low or they've gone down. And the department director might say something like, well, it's just because of this. So as a city, I think we don't want to be in a place to just say, oh, okay, let's just go on. And I don't mean that you don't necessarily trust directors, but I think that we have to dig into that a little bit to make sure that what's being reflected is accurate. So I think believe the data. It's just really what it comes down to, and don't necessarily be accepting of a really quick kind of one-off explanation of things. So strong leadership backed by data and strategy. So one of the things that I think is very or greatly affects employee engagement is just having strong leadership in a department. Now, what that leadership does needs to be backed by data, and it needs to be backed by strategy, and it needs to align with the department's approach, and it needs to align with the city's approach. But what I mean is, I think that within organizations, we really have to work to promote leaders who are among that very engaged group and that will act to make decisions in the city's best interest and in the employees' best interest. When we have those leadership vacuums and we have people that really aren't making decisions that they should or supporting employees or doing their job the way they should, then it turns down that employee engagement. And we've all worked in that environment, right? We've got examples of great leaders who we think, I hope I can live up to that someday. And we've got examples of leaders we had where you think, or where I think, my goal is to never be that. That's just reality. So within our cities and within the city's departments, I think we've got to work to really get those leaders promoted that can be strong. Some of that comes down to accountability and all the things that you have to work through with people, developing them, supporting them, etc. But having leadership that is not strong, I think, is something that will really have a negative effect on the city's culture and on employee engagement and on that employee's work group. I think we all know that, the biggest thing that matters to a line employee is the line employee's first line supervisor, right? Not the city's strategy or what the city manager wants, thinks, or anything like that. It's what's going on down to the ground in that individual work group. So, transparency and authenticity, which I didn't know what other word to put there, but I also feel like that's cliche. And so I'll give you some examples on transparency. In the police department, for instance, I tried to really over communicate with the employees about anything that was going on, about any decisions that were made, anything they felt could affect their world, I talked about with them. Now I know that some of that's scalable depending on the size of the department and everything. Here I had 73 officers. So an example of the transparency thing is employee discipline is always a hot topic, right? Somebody's coworkers get disciplined or suspended or even terminated, and typically the way it works is, all of a sudden my buddy has gotten terminated from the city, and he's telling me how he was treated unfairly and got a bad deal, and et cetera, et cetera. And the city's approach to this is to say, well, that's a personnel matter, and we really don't talk about it. And that's the system that I was raised in. So when I became chief, what I asked our city attorney and our HR director is, that's how we handle this with employees. But in Texas, that employee can go request those records of that investigation or that incident or of that discipline, and they're going to get it all, minus some social security numbers or dates of birth or things that are confidential by law. So if an employee can go get those records and do whatever they want with them, then why can't I sit down with the employees and say, hey, this is the deal? So even within the police department, we have occasion where I have to terminate an officer. There's some kind of serious discipline, and I would go around and sit down with all the work groups and the shifts. It would normally take me about 4 or 5 days to make them all because of hours and scheduling. And I would always say, hey, I'm here because I want you to know I'm not trying to run down the employee or speak ill of the employee. But remember that in reality, somebody can request these records and get all this information. And if they can do that, then I want to talk to you about what went on. And then I would tell them the story. And I would always say, I'm not trying to convince you. I'm not trying to sell you. I just want you to be able to follow the bouncing red ball of logic to how I got to where I was. And universally, all the times I did this, I would get to the end and, these groups of police officers would go, well, yeah, that makes sense. I think I would have done the same thing. I always found it to be really effective because that employee, the subject of it, their relationships don't end, so they're still telling a story, right, to the people that work there. And I didn't want to let this thing build up where they felt like the department was mistreating somebody. So it eliminated that, and it also convinced the employees that I'm going to come and talk to you about whatever is going on. And we did that with everything. That's another quick example. I can remember talking to all of our supervisors in a meeting about a change we were going to have to do because of something that was enacted by the Texas legislature that was going to make things more records intensive, and it was going to take them away from the street a little bit more, and it was going to put more work on them. So, I'm telling this room of supervisors this, and I can see the groans and but I told them and said, hey, if you feel like you're having more trouble with this than I am, it's just because I'm at the last stage of grief because I've known about this for a few days and you just heard it. And they all kind of laugh, and I'll tell them, I don't like this either, guys, but the state legislature does what they do. So none of us really have a choice. So let's just figure out the best way to get through it and then let them design the system for how we were going to record and manage this data. So, you know, I think in that moment they understood how I felt about it too. And then they had some buy-in and how they were going to manage this. And then I think those things just they get communicated from them down to the officers a lot better when we do it that way. So this is one of those where I think you see people first, and you think, well, duh, we know that people are first. We all know that, but do we really do it? I mean, the people are just so important. The person standing in front of you is the most important thing that you'll do that day. If somebody comes in and talk to me, I will try to turn my computer monitor and everything off because I'm too ADD to see something pop up and want to look. And I think sometimes it's even those small things of going out of the way, checking on people. Employees are human beings just like us, and your employees are going through stuff, whether you know about it or not. So a phone call, a card, anything that we can do to just show them that we care about them as people is just so important. And this is coming from a guy who is not like, I want to give you a hug and make you feel better. But they have to know that we care about them as employees. And when you're hitting all those different lanes, when we're measuring our success in this, when we're doing our best to put them first, when we're holding them accountable and promoting and rewarding the good people, and we're over communicating, and we're being as transparent and as authentic as we can, which sometimes is hard, but I think that we have to do it these days, then you'll see all those scores improve. And I mean, more so than just the scores, that's data, but it just becomes a better, happier place to work. That authenticity piece, I mean, what I always strive to do was just to sit down with employees and talk with them and then feel like you're getting me. I mean, I'm measured in what I'm saying because I'm a professional. But I'm not trying to convince them of something. I'm just going to talk through the issue with them. And in my mind, nothing is off the table. Whatever they want to ask or whatever they want to talk about, James is going to talk about that with them. And my answer may be, I got to go find out, but I'll get back with you. But it just helps create this environment where I think they really believe that the departments of the city's leadership is approachable and wants the best for them and wants to work with them. So, Mike, that's all I got in terms of the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that have come up.
Yeah, thanks, James. Trying to get my camera to come back on there. Very nice presentation. Really, really enjoyed that, and several things that kind of piqued my interest I want to ask about. But we have some questions that came in from our participants too, and I want to get to those first. One of them is that that the person said they use another kind of a employee survey, and one of their biggest challenges is to get employees to take the survey because they don't really believe anything will change. So can you talk a little bit about employee participation there? Are they eager to participate? Do you have any other motivational things that you use to get them to participate?
I think our participation rate citywide is above 90%. What we always tell employees is that we want your feedback and we are going to use it. And if decisions need to be made based on that, then we're going to do that. Now, I was always really careful um, to form that in a way where I'm not trying to, like, if I'm sitting in front of room employees, I'm not telling you you need to go give us positive reviews on that. We want to know what you think, be it good or bad or whatever. I just want you to take it. It's anonymous. What you say in there is, or it's completely up to you. But particularly the first year that you use it, or the first couple times, if you get that, well, I don't want to do it. My conversation with them would be, if you want things to be better, if you want things to change, we're asking you for that input so that we can change them. So, and if you're wondering if we're going to make decisions based on that, well, you may just have to extend us a little trust and take an anonymous survey and then see what we're able to do with it,
Yeah.
which, by the way, we would extend that to you also.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good. While we're kind of on the topic of getting people to take it, another question comes up is, how do you facilitate people that are in the field taking the survey? So, a Parks and Rec crew, for example, or a Public Works crew, it's not as easy. They're not in front of a computer all the time. How do you facilitate that?
It's a link through their employee email to take it. So, I mean, if they choose to, they can do it from their phones in the field. There's computers, and they're like, for instance, the parks maintenance building. I mean, they've got workstations in there, and I mean, we're talking about what might be 5 or 6 minutes probably to
Mhm.
take a survey. So it really doesn't take that long. So again, they can do it on a mobile or facilitating, come in 5 minutes early and do it at the computer. But because it's important at the city, we would expect supervisors to make allowances so that that could happen.
Yeah. And do you see as good of participation in that level of employee than others, or is that something you've measured?
They participate. What we do have to do, and probably many people have already thought of this, is, for instance, we need to have a version of this that's in Spanish. There are some that just communicate better in Spanish than in English. So we've done those things, and yeah, they do participate, and it's valuable feedback.
I think people really enjoyed on the webinar your discussion about how you handle talking with employees regarding somebody that had to be terminated, for example. But then there's some questions on that.
Mhm.
One is, you don't work with a union, I don't think, at the police department in Southlake. You do have an association, but how does that factor into it?
So we're not unionized, and you're right, Mike. We do have an association, and here the police department gets along very well with the association. I mean, it almost functions more almost like a support group, sort of for officers, than anything. Um, but so if you're unionized, you would have to adhere to whatever is in that collective bargaining agreement. So it may talk about things that you can or can't do, but it's not running down people. What it is if I'm going to make this decision, then I'm going to be able to sit in front of you and tell you why I made it, and here are all the steps within it. Everybody roughly knows what happened anyway. 2 minutes after something happens, the whole department knows that it happened. So I know that's a weird thing.
Yeah, that's a very different approach than I would say most organizations that I'm familiar with in the public sector and nonprofit, I mean, private sector operate by. And I think it's interesting. That's been very successful for you. There are other questions that came up of like, have you had any times where that sort of blew up in your face and it created more alienation between you and employees or employees and management?
No, not once. I mean, not the entire time I was there did that ever backfire. And I don't mean that we did it once. I mean, I did this frequently. Um, but I think part of that is the trust that we've built with employees and the ability to sit down with them and say, hey guys, you all know this happened. Here is what went on. Here's the allegation. Here's what we found, et cetera, et cetera. And just working through that with them and just being very upfront about it and doing it in a way, maybe it goes back to that authenticity thing that I don't like to say. Maybe it goes back to the ability to just communicate with them and them understand that I hate this as much as you do. I mean, I would
Mm.
frequently tell them that. Like, I always think I was having a perfectly good Wednesday, and then this issue walked into my office and found me. So I hate this, but I do want you to know what went on because I think you should. And I think that decisions that we make can be shown in the light of day. So here you are. And that's always worked out. But I know that if I was to go, to some other city and talk about that, they might say, well, we can't do that or we won't do that. I'll just encourage you to ask yourself, why not? I mean, if that's approached in the right way, hey, we just want you to understand, and it's public record anyway, so let's just talk about it. It alleviates a lot of the mystique and the unhappiness with things if they feel like they're talked to.
Yeah, I really appreciate that approach. I'm sure at first your city attorney's office had a little bit of hesitation, but obviously that's worked out very well, and that's really good. Um, Another question came in, kind of more personal for you. Obviously, you're very busy as assistant city manager. You're busy as a police chief, and all department heads are. What are some of your time management strategies that you've used, particularly in regards to email and meetings and one-on-one conversations? Anything you can share with us that would be helpful to everyone?
I think it goes back to that thing where the people are always first. Email is great and horrible, right? For
Mhm.
everybody, it's necessary, but email doesn't determine or shouldn't determine how we spend our time. But for me, like I'll have my email minimized on my computer where I don't see it all the time. If I'm working on something or doing something on my phone, there are no red bubbles or notifications on the email because I don't want to see it every time something comes in. Because in reality, if something is of a risk level or an importance level, or an urgency that it needs me, I'm going to get a phone call and I'm going to
Mhm.
get a text. I'm not going to get notified by email of a crisis or something that's that urgent. Now, I don't mean to tell you that I'm always that great at it. I fight that just like everybody else does. And there's times where I think, man, I'm going to throw this phone as far as I can. Maybe one day when I retire, I may just go to a flip phone, a jitterbug flip phone. One day, that's what I'm like. Uh, yeah, that's always a fight.
Yeah, I hear you. Um, so I really appreciate this webinar, James, and I've watched Southlake use this the Q12 tool, and it seems like you know you have you have great numbers, and even still you have 33% not engaged. Do you find that those are usually spread out evenly through the organization, or are there times when you've looked at it and said, "Man, it's really concentrated in this area," and how do you address that depending upon the situation?
Well, so if you're the city manager and assistant city manager, if I ask you, hey, what are your problem areas within your city operations? That's what you see in that. So you should already probably have a sense of exactly where that's at. But those middle, not engaged people, not the disengaged that are working against you, but there's that middle section. Those are the people where you can really spend a chunk of your time because you can coach them, you can mentor them, you can move them into a different position in the department that uses their talents or their desires better. You can improve things in that category. The actively disengaged people need to go.
Yeah.
They're working against. You're paying them to destroy your organization every day. And I'm not trying to be mean about it. That's just the bottom line.
Yeah, yeah, they've got, they're probably men and women of goodwill, but maybe it's just not the right fit, and
Yeah,
everything's better for them and the organization if they go
absolutely.
find what really is better for them. But that disengaged group or the unengaged, that's the group that you're saying a lot of difference can be made there.
Yes. So you don't want to ignore your high performers, your actively engaged people, because they very often they want to know they're doing a good job and they want more things to do to develop. So you have to spend time with them. But that middle section are the ones that you can change. Um, I've sat down and talked with employees, and I was the first person to ask them things about their job or how they were doing in X amount of time, and they would lack connection. Maybe is a good way to look at it, but you can really drive your organization upwards by focusing on that middle group.
Yeah. And these are anonymous. So, they're not like,
Yeah.
oh, Mike filled this out. He's unengaged. Now, one more time, I don't know if you specifically said this, but how many employees do you have at Southlake, and what's the percentage of them that do complete the survey each year?
I believe it is over 90%. We're just shy of 500 employees. That fluctuates a little bit because of our rec center and kids and part-time stuff in the summer. I don't want to misinform you. I believe it was over 90%.
Okay.
So we have a pretty good rate. I always wish that everybody would do it. I mean, I really don't understand why people don't. If we're asking you, tell us what you think and how you feel so that we can make things better. I don't know why you wouldn't participate in that. But there's always a few that don't.
Yeah, yeah. Well, James, thank you again for your time. It's a great presentation and really fascinating. And congratulations on all the great things that are happening in Southlake, and for you in a recent promotion to be an assistant city manager there. And we really appreciate your time today. And thank you, everyone that has joined us. And I hope that you have gotten some things out of it. We'll send you the link so that you can review it again. It'll also be on our SGR YouTube channel. And thanks to Kim and Lisa and everybody at SGR that's made this possible. Hope you have a great week, and